to Fahrenheit 451 Lesson 13, analyzing how characters interact to advance the plot and how allusion develops the theme in a literary text. We've been reading Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury and analyzing the characters, symbolism, and foreshadowing in the text. Today we will continue to read The Hearth and the Salamander from Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. We will analyze how Beatty and Montag interact, and we will analyze how allusion develops the theme. For this, you will need Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, your reading protocol, conversation stems, and discussion tracker handout from Lesson 1, your reading log from Lesson 1, the Evolution of Montag handout from Lesson 10, and the Anchor Text Theme Tracker handout from Lesson 10. Now we're going to read pages 29 through 32. While we read, note in your reading log the language that Beatty and Montag use as they speak to each other. The flutter of cards, motion of hands, of eyelids, the drone of the time voice in the firehouse ceiling, 1:35, Thursday morning, November 4th, 1:36, 1:37 a.m., the tick of the playing cards on the greasy tabletop. All the sounds came to Montag behind his closed eyes, behind the barrier he had momentarily erected. He could feel the firehouse full of glitter and shine and silence, of brass colors, the colors of coins, of gold, of silver. The unseen men across the table were sighing on their cards, waiting. 1:45. The voice clock mourned out the cold hour of a morning of a still colder year. "What's wrong, Montag?" Montag opened his eyes. A radio hummed somewhere. "War may be declared any hour. This country stands ready to defend its—" The firehouse trembled as a great flight of jet planes whistled a single note across the black morning sky. Montag blinked. Beatty was looking at him as if he were a museum statue. At any moment Beatty might rise and walk about him, touching, exploring his guilt and self-consciousness. Guilt? What guilt was that? "Your play, Montag." Montag looked at these men whose faces were sunburnt by 1,000 real and 10,000 imaginary fires, whose work flushed their cheeks and fevered their eyes. These men who looked steadily into their platinum igniter flames as they lit their eternally burning black pipes. They and their charcoal hair and soot-colored brows and bluish ash-smeared cheeks where they had shaven close, but their heritage showed. Montag started up, his mouth opened. Had he ever seen a fireman that didn't have black hair, black brows, a fiery face, and a blue steel shaved but unshaved look? These men were all mirror images of himself. Were all firemen picked then for their looks as well as their proclivities? The color of cinders and ash about them, and the continual smell of burning from their pipes. Captain Beatty there raising in thunderheads of tobacco smoke. Beatty opening a fresh tobacco packet, crumpling the cellophane into a sound of fire. Montag looked at the cards in his own hands. I've been thinking about the fire last week, about the man whose library we fixed. What happened to him? They took him screaming off to the asylum. He wasn't insane. Beatty arranged his cards quietly. Any man's insane who thinks he can fool the government and us. I've tried to imagine, said Montag, just how it would feel. I mean, to have firemen burn our houses and our books. We haven't any books. But if we did have some. You got some? Beatty blinked slowly. No, Montag gazed beyond them to the wall with the typed list of 1,000,000 forbidden books. Their names leapt in fire, burning down the years under his axe and his hose which sprayed not water but kerosene. No, but in his mind a cool wind started up and blew out the ventilator grill at home, softly, chilling his face. And again he saw himself in a green park talking to an old man, a very old man, and the wind from the park was cold too. Montag hesitated. What? Was it always like this? The firehouse? Our work? I mean, well, once upon a time. Once upon a time, Beatty said. What kind of talk is that? Fool, thought Montag to himself, you'll give it away. At the last fire, a book of fairy tales, he glanced at a single line. I mean, he said, in the old days before homes were completely fireproofed. Suddenly it seemed a much younger voice was speaking for him. He opened his mouth, and it was Clarice McClellan saying, Didn't firemen prevent fires rather than stoke them up and get them going? That's rich. Stoneman and Black drew forth their rule books, which also contained brief histories of the firemen of America, and laid them out where Montag, though long familiar with them, might read. Established, 1790, to burn English-influenced books in the colonies. First fireman, Benjamin Franklin. Rule 1. Answer the alarm quickly. 2. Start the fire swiftly. 3. Burn everything. 4. Report back to the firehouse immediately. 5. Send alert for other alarms. Everyone watched Montag. He did not move. The alarm sounded. The bell in the ceiling kicked itself 200 times. Suddenly there were 4 empty chairs. The cards fell in a flurry of snow. The brass pole shivered. The men were gone. Montag sat in his chair. Below, the orange dragon coughed to life. Montag slid down the pole like a man in a dream. The mechanical hound leapt up in its kennel, its eyes all green flame. Montag, you forgot your helmet. He seized it off the wall behind him, ran, leapt, and they were off, the night wind hammering about their siren scream and their mighty metal thunder. Now let's discuss the questions on the screen. How do Montag and Beatty interact in this excerpt? What effect does Beatty have on Montag? How does this advance the plot and develop the themes? Now I want you to add to the Evolution of Montag handout to include Beatty's impact on Montag. So now I want you to read along as we read aloud pages 32 through 37. In your reading log, I want you to note the language that is used to describe Beatty and Montag. It was a flaking 3-story house in the ancient part of the city, a century old if it was a day, but like all houses it had been given a thin fireproof plastic sheath many years ago, and this preservative shell seemed to be the only thing holding it in the sky. Here we are! The engine slammed to a stop. Beatty, Stoneman, and Black ran up the sidewalk, suddenly odious and fat in their plump, fireproof slickers. Montag followed. They crashed the front door and grabbed at a woman, though she was not running. She was not trying to escape. She was only standing, weaving from side to side, her eyes fixed upon a nothingness in the wall, as if they had struck her a terrible blow upon the head. Her tongue was moving in her mouth, and her eyes seemed to be trying to remember something, and then they remembered, and her tongue moved again. Play the man, Master Ridley. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England, as I trust shall never be put out. Enough of that, said Beatty. Where are they? He slapped her face with amazing objectivity and repeated the question. The old woman's eyes came to a focus upon Beatty. You know where they are, or you wouldn't be here, she said. Stoneman held out the telephone alarm card with the complaint signed in telephone duplicate on the back. Have reason to suspect attic. 11 Number Elm, North Elm, City, EB. That would be Mrs. Blake, my neighbor, said the woman, reading the initials. All right, man, let's get 'em. Next thing, they were up in musty blackness, swinging silver hatchets at doors that were, after all, unlocked, tumbling through like boys all rollick and shout. Hey! A fountain of books sprang down upon Montag as he climbed, shuddering, up the sheer stairwell. How inconvenient! Always before it had been like snuffing a candle. The police went first and adhesive taped the victim's mouth and bandaged him off into their glittering beetle cars. So when you arrived, you found an empty house. You weren't hurting anyone. You were only hurting things. And since things really couldn't be hurt, since things felt nothing, and things don't scream or whimper, as this woman might begin to scream and cry out, there was nothing to tease your conscience. Later. You were simply cleaning up. Janitorial work, essentially. Everything to its proper place. Quick with the kerosene. Who's got a match? But now, tonight, someone had slipped. This woman was spoiling the ritual. The men were making too much noise, laughing, joking, to cover her terrible accusing silence below. She made the empty rooms roar with accusation and shake down a fine dust of guilt that was sucked in their nostrils as they plunged about. It was neither cricket nor correct. Montag felt an immense irritation. She shouldn't be here on top of everything. Books bombarded his shoulders, his arms, his upturned face. A book lit almost obediently, like a white pigeon in his hands, wings fluttering. In the dim, wavering light, a page hung open, and it was a snowy feather, the words delicately painted thereon. In all the rush and fervor, Montag had only an instant to read a line, but it blazed in his mind for the next minute as if stamped there with fiery steel. Time has fallen asleep in the afternoon sunshine. He dropped the book. Immediately another fell into his arms. Montag, up here! Montag's hand closed like a mouth, crushed the book with a wild devotion, with an insanity of mindlessness to his chest. The men above were hurling shovelfuls of magazines into the dusty air. They fell like slaughtered birds, and the woman stood below, like a small girl among the bodies. Montag had done nothing. His hand had done it all. His hand, with a brain of its own, with a conscience and a curiosity in each trembling finger, had turned thief. Now it plunged the book back under his arm, pressed it tight to sweating armpit, rushed out empty with a magician's flourish. Look here. Innocent. Look. He gazed, shaken, at that white hand. He held it way out as if he were far-sighted. He held it close as if he were blind. Montag! He jerked about. Don't stand there, idiot! The books lay like great mounds of fishes left to dry. The men danced and slipped and fell over them. Titles glittered their golden eyes, falling, gone. Kerosene! They pumped the cold fluid from the numbered 451 tanks strapped to their shoulders. They coated each book. They pumped rooms full of it. They hurried downstairs, Montag staggering after them in the kerosene fumes. Come on, woman! The woman knelt among the books, touching the drenched leather and cardboard, reading the gilt titles with her fingers while her eyes accused Montag. You can't ever have my books, she said. You know the law, said Beatty. Where's your common sense? None of those books agree with each other. You've been locked up here for years with a regular Tower of Babel. Snap out of it. The people in those books never lived. Come on now. She shook her head. The whole house is going up, said Beatty. The men walked clumsily to the door. They glanced back at Montag, who stood near the woman. You're not leaving her here, he protested. She won't come. Force her, then. Beatty raised his hand in which was concealed the igniter. We're due back at the house. Besides, these fanatics always try suicide. The pattern's familiar. Montag placed his hand on the woman's elbow. You can come with me. No, she said. Thank you anyway. I'm counting to 10, said Beatty. 1, 2. Please, said Montag. Go on, said the woman. 3, 4. Here! Montag pulled at the woman. The woman replied quietly, I want to stay here. 5, 6. You can stop counting, she said. She opened the fingers of one hand slightly, and in the palm of the hand was a single slender object. An ordinary kitchen match. The sight of it rushed the men out and down away from the house. Captain Beatty, keeping his dignity, backed slowly through the front door, his pink face burnt and shiny from 1,000 fires and night excitements. God, thought Montag, how true! Always at night the alarm comes, never by day. Is it because fire is prettier by night? More spectacle? A better show? The pink face of Beatty now showed the faintest panic in the door. The woman's hand twitched on the single matchstick. The fumes of kerosene bloomed up about her. Montag felt the hidden book pound like a heart against his chest. Go on, said the woman, and Montag felt himself back away and sway out the door, after Beatty, down the steps, across the lawn, where the path of kerosene lay like the track of some evil snail. On the front porch, where she had come to weigh them quietly with her eyes, her quietness a condemnation, the woman stood motionless. Beatty flicked his fingers to spark the kerosene. He was too late. Montag gasped. The woman on the porch reached out with contempt to them all and struck the kitchen match against the railing. People ran out of houses all down the street. Now we will discuss the questions on the slide. What language is used to describe Beatty and Montag? What effect does Beatty have on Montag? How does this advance the plot and develop the themes? Now I want you to add to the Evolution of Montag handout to include Beatty's impact on Montag. Now we're going to take turns reading aloud pages 37 through 38. In your reading log, note Beatty's thoughts, words, and actions as we read. Now let's discuss the passage that we just read. What language is used to describe Beatty and Montag? Why are these words significant to Beatty's development? What does Beatty's knowledge of the quote reveal about his character? How does this advance the plot or develop a theme? Now I want you to add to the Evolution of Montag handout to include Beatty's impact on Montag. I need a volunteer to read aloud the excerpts on the slide. Determine the meaning of heresy in context and add it to your vocabulary log from Lesson 1. Now let's discuss the passage. What literary devices do you see in this passage? Now, one thing to note is that there is a reference to a historical event in this passage. When you refer to something from the past, either in literature or history, it is called allusion. Allusion. So now I want you to add allusion to your anchor text theme tracker and use the information in the passage on the board. How does this allusion relate to what is happening in the text? Why did the woman set fire to her own house? Now let's look at the slide. How is Montag influenced by his experience responding to this alarm? Why is this significant? Support your response with evidence from the text. Write your response on the first page of your Evolution of Montag handout. Consider these questions as you respond. How do we know that Montag is questioning his role as a fireman? What could Bradbury be trying to convey through this change? When you are finished, look up and we will move on. For homework tonight, you are going to read pages 38 through 50 in Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Then you will update the Evolution of Montag handout to include Millie's impact on Montag. For this, you will need Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury and your Evolution of Montag handout. Your homework is also posted in Google Classroom. Congratulations! You have completed Lesson 13 of the Fahrenheit 451 unit. In this lesson, you learned that Montag evolves as a character as a result of setting a house on fire, and that he seems to question Beatty's actions at the alarm. You also analyzed how characters interact to advance the plot and how allusion develops the themes in a literary text.